Sholem Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Shalom Alechem. Peace and blessing to you, all, everyone. This is release day part 2. Again, all this is from Facebook live stream, Dr. Abram Weisfeld Facebook live streaming, and this took place on April the 8th of 2019.
But what's ironic is that there's already 2 million Palestinian refugees in Jordan. So they cannot be pushed out into Jordan. Jordan would not allow them to be pushed out into Jordan. They have sort of, like a peace treaty with Israel in which Israel will not allow those 2 million refugees to return, to their lands in Palestine, of course. And Jordan doesn't want to have any more Palestinian refugees because the Jordanian population is only previously was only about 2 million, including the Bedouins from ancient Nabatea, the Bedouins. And so there's 2 million Palestinian refugees, 2 million Jordanians. The 2 million Palestinian refugees have now been granted pretty well citizenship. And the Queen even herself is Palestinian. So Jordan, agrees not to send back those 2 million, Palestinian refugees. And there are many Palestinians here in the West Bank even who still retain their Jordanian identities. I don't know about passports, but they have papers from Jordan. And even the Samaritans, the Jewish Palestinians who are here since forever, have Jordanian identity papers together with Palestinian identity papers and Israel citizenship. So the settlements, they come there, to steal as much land as they can from the villages. And there's not that many settlers, like it's increased tremendously, okay, but in the whole of the West Bank there's like 400,000 settlers, 200,000 in East Jerusalem, by 400,000 here, but the number of Palestinians is 2.5 million. Okay, so their strategy is to take up as much land as possible. Like each settler gets, like a private house, with surrounding garden and lands, to spread out as much as possible, and then they set up, like greenhouses all around, and set up a perimeter, a safety perimeter, like with motion detectors and lights, even further away from the actual settlement itself. Oh, visitor. Okay. Yes, they're stopping. Yes, they're coming out. But not bringing their guns out with them. So, they're finding out what's going on. So the soldier's motioning with his hand as if he was directing people to stand somewhere or other. Hello there. Yes, you're being recorded. You're on live Canada feed. Okay, close the door. Get lost. Okay, bye. Oh, sorry, you can't say get lost. That's considered to be an offense, especially when you're under detention. And if a soldier is saying to you, like, sheket, which means quiet, but the way they say it, it means like shut up. If you say that back to them, like I did one time, the soldier turned to me and said, "What? You said sheket to me? You told me to shut up?" And I said, "Oh, no, I just said sheket. It means quiet, doesn't it?" And it does. That's what it means in Hebrew. So he backed off. But, oh yeah, another favorite expression of the soldiers during our detention was lo deberit, which means don't talk, especially if you're talking in Arabic. Not permitted. And then the soldiers would shout at everybody, including Palestinian prisoners, in Hebrew only, even if they might know some Arabic. More Palestinian workers coming back. Passed the whole day at work, and only the night in the dark with their families. Here's the moon up there as well. Moon crescent. New moon. New moon. Okay, Gadir, where are you? We're waiting for you to be liberated from the prison. Yeah, so lo deberet means, like don't talk. And pronounced in a way that if you don't obey, then you may be subject to violence. Okay. And actually, Abdel Nassar, an older man, in traditional garb, who knows a lot of, Arabic chants and songs and stuff, when he was told, to shut up once, when he was explaining that he was in Palestine and not in Israel, he got pissed off and he started to chant, and so they took him to another room, and then he started to sing, and so they slapped him around on the head until he lost consciousness. So he was beaten up. And then when he regained consciousness about an hour later, he was brought back to our cell, and he was not in a very healthy state. Okay, still waiting for Gadir. More workers coming back. Okay, we're still live. We'll continue to be live for the release of Gadir from the prison, the 8th prisoner taken last Tuesday. A number of us who were taken last Tuesday as prisoner are present here. Her husband here, 1, myself 2, Nasser 3, Ghassan 4, well 5. 5 of us are here. Okay. More Palestinians coming back from work. Coming back by minibus, probably. So that means they're carrying all their daily possessions with them. So that means that they've been working inside 48. Yeah, here's another minibus transporting the workers back. Okay. This is Palestine. And that is a Zionist prison over there, planted on Palestine. Now, the host settlement project and the proposed annexation that Netanyahu has announced in his election campaign just the other day is part of a host strategy. Okay, now the Zionists don't do anything without strategy. The Zionist movement has been planning this whole project since 1897. Now, the way in which they've been able to be successful is this. I'll explain it to you. The first wave of settlers came as a result of the Holocaust, but not voluntarily. My parents were refugees in the refugee camp of Breslau in the American sector of Germany when the Zionists came into the refugee camp and tried to recruit people to go to Palestine. My father told me that he refused because he didn't want to go to another war, him being, a religious Orthodox pacifist. And he was never, a Zionist, because before the Holocaust, before the war, the vast majority of the Jewish people in Eastern Europe were not Zionists. They were socialists, and they supported, to a greater extent than any other political party in the municipal elections, the Jewish Bund, which was a Jewish socialist civil rights movement that was very strong at that time. It had a trade union movement as well. Okay, most of our members, my mother was a Jewish Bundist from Warsaw, so I'm a Jewish Bundist. But most of the Jewish Bundist members were killed, in the Holocaust by the Nazis and burned, of course, including my family, most of my family. Out of about 400 members in both of my father's and mother's families, 4 survived. 4 out of 400. You get that? 4 out of 400. Okay. So the refugees there in the refugee camp, they could go to another country if they had, a member of their family in another country that would sponsor them for a visa. If they didn't have a member of their family in another country that would sponsor them for a visa, they couldn't go to that country because that country wouldn't accept them. They didn't want to have Jewish refugees. I'm talking about Canada, United States, South America.
This commentary that I am providing was petitioned upon me by Hannah Toff, our councilwoman of strategic projects, Isaiah P. Kametstein, our councilman of committees, and Miriam Emmisberg, our councilwoman of education. For Miriam, she wanted me to finally reference openly Frederick Danson, so I am now going to. Now, the only reason why I have been hesitant to reference Frederick Danson is because some of us have access to his writings, but they never were officially published. That is being rectified thanks to his long life, his best friend who is still living, Herbert Dillon, who had some meetings. It was good that she officially got acquainted with Frederick Danson's history. I'm saying Donna Newman. Sorry, Donna Newman got acquainted with Frederick Danson's history via noting Herbert Dillon. Herbert Dillon and her spent some time in Tucson talking. This was highly asked to happen by both myself and Miriam Emmisberg. Miriam Emmisberg actually had accompanied her to Tucson to talk to Herbert Dillon. I wanted to be able to be there, but I was not able to be there at that time. So, for Miriam, she wanted me to finally reference openly Frederick Danson, so I am now going to. It has been asked of me why those who wanted to know that myself, having strong Marxist-Leninist Maoist leanings, that how is it that I don't just say that I am a Marxist-Leninist Maoist? And the answer is because I am not a Marxist-Leninist Maoist. I have strong Marxist-Leninist Maoist teachings. And much of that has to do with Frederick Danson, who I consider completely superior to Karl Marx. And I'm going to say something very sectarian. That's not an opinion. I'm going to be very sectarian here. And we do promote anti-sectarianism, but when it comes to intellectual basis, Frederick Danson versus Herbert Dillon, no context. No contest at all. The self-hating Jewish person, Karl Marx, should bow to the greatness of the Christian, yes, which I never say, but in this context, the pro-Jewish Christian Frederick Danson, who understood national cultural autonomy, and who understood certain concepts of orientation that Karl Marx was not intellectually advanced enough to understand. Don't think that we as Jewish people have not suffered under Marxists. Now, we do seek to build bridges with Marxists, and we are already doing it, and very soon the strong Marxists are going to be chanting with the Bund, and the Bund will be chanting with the strong Marxists against the apartheid wall. That's inevitable, but for that to happen, that means we have to resolve our differences. We are making apologies to Marxist-Leninists, and they are making apologies to us. And that will continue. That solidarity will grow, but it will only grow so long as we don't water down our grievances towards one another. So both myself and Miriam Emmisberg were students of Frederick Danson. Fred used to teach us about national cultural autonomy and the logic of cosmopolitanality and national cosmopolitanality. And Miriam Emmisberg will be including this as part of her contribution to our manifesto. Now, in the rabbinite or rabbinical context, that is in for description that refers to full Mosaic tradition. Samaritans are traditionally not recognized as Jewish. However, in the more archaic rabbinite traditions, the Samaritans may not be necessarily seen as Jewish, yet recognized they are as a type of Israelite. Mixed tribes of Ephraim and Messiah. And that means that the most archaic rabbinite traditions recognize Samaritans as part of the house of Joseph, or as the house of Joseph itself. There's some variations to that, but that is the actual general consensus of the archaic rabbinite traditions, which have actually largely been destroyed by the Zionists in cultural genocide. Now, to be clear, those same traditions hold that once the Samaritans actively seek conversion to Judaism, that this will be a closer step towards the coming of the Messiah. Yet the same traditions strongly emphasize that this can never be forced in any way, that they will somehow miraculously seek it. Now, in contrast to that, the Bundist movement does completely recognize the Samaritans as a type of Jewish Palestinian. So, in the Bundist movement context, we actually step a little further and we completely recognize the Samaritans as being Jewish because they have Torah culture. And we recognize them as Jewish Palestinians. And that is why Dr. Weisfeld has repeatedly said so. And no one is better to say that than him. And we confirm what Dr. Weisfeld says. See, there's a lot of confusion where people think, okay, well, you guys disagree with Dr. Weisfeld. Dr. Weisfeld disagrees with us. Why do you think we're trying to get him in Arizona? Because we don't necessarily disagree with him, and he doesn't necessarily disagree with us. We've actually been largely on the same page. There are differences in semantics and nuances, but when it comes to the larger picture, Dr. Abram Weisfeld and us here in Arizona, we're in complete lockstep with him. Every time Dr. Abram Weisfeld has said that the Samaritans are Jewish Palestinians, that's a very Bundist position which we hold with him, completely, without reservation. We hope that Pesach he will be spending with the Samaritans. That's our hope, because that's a cultural requirement that we feel that he needs and should not be deprived from. Now, as far as Jordanians also being Palestinian, this is not a contradiction. Just as it is not a contradiction for Dr. Abram Weisfeld to be Jewish, Canadian, and Palestinian. Frederick Danson had explained logically and correctly that religiosity is a matter of orientation, just as heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, and asexual are matters of orientation, not choice. So religiosity is a matter of orientation. It's not a matter of choice. Now, therefore, so if somebody is both black and Jewish, those are two different nationalities, but there's no contradiction because being black is not dependent on religiosity, whereas being Jewish kind of is. That's not the same thing as a religious observance. Religiosity is not the same thing as religious observance. These things are tied into religion, but religiosity is a matter of orientation. If you strip away theology, which I don't really favor that personally, but if you do, you end up with these certain stances. Jewish people see things a certain way socially that Christians are just never going to agree with socially. So these are matters of orientation. But you could be both black and Jewish, because black ethnicity is African ethnicity and it has a distinct culture. And by the way, there are those who are African and black in the sense culturally as well as ethnically, but it isn't really something that I should dive into too much. I mean, I understand it pretty well, but it's really Isaiah P. Kamitz-Dean that needs to talk more about that. And he is writing further into that in the manifesto for us. So Jewish nationality is cultural and religiosity. It is cultural religiosity. See, nationality can be cultural religiosity or it can be cultural ethnicity. Religiosity contradicts because it is orientation. A.B. Weisfeld is in ethnic terms Ashkenazi, and Ashkenazim are ethnically related to the Palestinians. Yeah, so much for the stupid Khazarian conspiracy theories. And in a cultural context, Dr. Abram Weisfeld is Palestinian. Ethnicity should never be related to DNA tests, because this is a racialist ideology. Ethnicity is dependent on the continuation of a people via common ancestry. Now, one of the most important things to point out is that, as Jewish people, we suffer with a collective PTSD. I attribute that statement, by the way, to Dr. Abram Weisfeld. I would have never said that before. I don't think any of us would, but we owe that to the chairman. He has said so, and we are officially confirming that. So we suffer with a collective PTSD to some extent or another. And you can liken the Zionists to battered children who are so abused to the point that they grow up to become predators. But we, as the Jewish Bundesdiaspora movement, say, we will not re-abuse, as the Zionist ideology teaches. Never again must be a slogan that we apply to everyone.
Europe was not hospitable to the Jewish population. Those Jewish people who went back to Poland, for instance, were very mistreated. And there was even a massacre that took place of Jewish people, about 75 Jewish people, after the Holocaust, after the war was over, in a village called Kielce, which was promoted by the Catholic Church and even by the Communist Party, and whose members were also in the Catholic Church. And the Communist Party made excuses thereafter, but they didn't stop the massacre from taking place. In fact, some of their members actually promoted it. So they didn't want to go back to Poland, and Russia was not hospitable to the Jewish people either, you know, because the Jewish Bundes leadership were imprisoned and died in prison under the Communist Party rule. And the Jewish Bundes who were invited to join the Communist Party and form a Jewish section were later, you know, purged and put into prison and killed as well. So that was not an option. So there they are in the refugee camp. 52% got visas to go to other countries, including my parents, and 48% did not. So they were sent to Palestine. Now, of course, the other option would have been, you know, to set up a Jewish autonomous territory in the area of Breslau in Germany, so that Jewish people would finally have, you know, like land to live on, you know, that was controlled by themselves. But nobody, you know, like proposed that. Nobody thought of that. Nobody asked for that because nobody expected that it could be granted. Okay, so that's how the first wave of 500,000 or maybe 300,000 or so came to Palestine to settle. Settle in where? Settle in Palestinian houses, of course, that were evacuated, you know, under the Zionist militias' military offensive against the Palestinian residents there, who went from village to village, you know, massacring a certain number to induce the rest of the residents of the villages, you know, 2,000 to 3,000 people, to leave, to go to the next village. Then the Zionist militia would move on to the next village, do the same thing again, massacre a bunch of Palestinians so that the others, you know, would flee away. And this, you know, wave of refugees, you know, went so far as into the West Bank. And why did the Zionist militia stop at the West Bank, at what's called the Green Line, where some of the apartheid wall is constructed now? Well, because the Jordanian army finally sent some military forces to stop the advance of the Zionist militias. Now, the Jordanian military was much larger than the Zionist militias, and they could have defeated the Zionist militias. But they didn't, because of a prior agreement between the King Hussein and the Zionist authorities to divide up Palestine. Yes. So Jordan took control of the West Bank. The Zionist militias took control of the other half. Well, it was more than half, actually. About, I think, 65% of historic Palestine was occupied by Zionist militias, even though the partition plan of the United Nations only allocated 35%, you know, of the Palestine land to be, you know, the state of Israel. Okay. So even though, and then Israel claims that they accepted the partition plan and that the Arabs did not, which is a big lie, evidently. You know, you can just check the frontier lines, and you can see that Israel did not follow the plan set forth by the United Nations General Assembly. And that, of course, was a resolution of the General Assembly, which Israel claims now is not legitimate when it passes resolutions condemning Israel for its violations of international law. Contradictions upon contradictions. Here, some more Palestinian workers coming home. There's a transport vehicle, likely from Israel. I'm going to go check the license plate to see if it's got an Israel license plate on it. Let's go check. I was right. That's an Israeli license plate. That vehicle comes from Israel because it's been transporting Palestinian workers from Israel, 48 Palestine, back to their homes here because they're not allowed to sleep inside 48, not allowed to bring their families inside 48. So they're brought into work as cheap labor and skilled labor. Palestinian workers are excellent workers, all very skilled in all sorts of trades, including stone sculpture. Okay, so the Zionist project took off with the remaining refugees who couldn't find any place else to live in the world. Okay. Hi, Laura. Welcome. Now, that was the first wave of settlers that the Zionists took control of, to establish a population that could expand into the territories that were occupied by the Zionist militias. That went beyond, the partition plan frontiers. Okay, the second wave of settlers that were brought into Palestine by the Zionist state were Jewish and Arab. Jewish Arabs from North Africa, from Morocco, from Tunisia, from Libya, from Algeria, from Egypt, and then further in the Orient, from Iraq. And the settlers that came from Morocco came on a willing basis because they thought they would have a better life inside, the state of Israel. To which they were sorely disappointed too, because when the Jewish Arab Mizrahim, as they're called, came into Israel, they were given some tents to live in the desert, basically, in the Negev. Now the Jewish immigrants, not refugees, but immigrants, because they were not expelled from the Arab countries. In fact, the Arab countries protected the Jewish people during the Second World War, during the Holocaust. In Morocco, the King Mohammed V assured the protection of the Jewish Moroccans, saying that they belonged to his people, and he would not let them be touched. And they weren't. In Europe, there was another matter, because the various European countries had governments that collaborated with the Nazis to one extent or another. Like in France, the Vichy government, allowed 40% of the Jewish French population to be taken away and murdered and burned. Now, the second wave of Jewish Arabs who came from North Africa, the Mizrahim, came because they thought that they would have a better life in the state of Israel, or because they feared for their lives. Why did they fear for their lives? Not because they were being attacked, although there were some riots from time to time, not many. And the fear was instilled in the Jewish Arab population by the activity of the Zionists, who came and set off bombs in synagogues as an incentive to convince the Jewish Arab population to leave Iraq and Egypt. And in Egypt there was such an attempt made, La Von affair, in which the the Zionist agents were discovered and stopped from setting off a bomb. In Iraq, it was not stopped. And so most of the Jewish Iraqi population left and went to Palestine. Now, this population was so numerous that they formed 70% of the Jewish Israeli population in the 50s. Then, that was the second wave of immigrants that the Zionists got control of. And of course, their children were put into an educational system that was just a matter of indoctrination, with no Jewish culture taught, just Zionist, history. And they became, convinced Zionists. And then the third wave, of course, the leadership of the Zionist state was all the Ashkenazi European Zionist organizers. And the Mizrahim, who were the vast majority of the population, never got into positions of power. They were only cheap labor again.
Alright, so from Hannah Toff, this is a paraphrase statement that I have based upon her words. That as far as her research goes, Joseph Stalin was very hospitable to the Jewish people, yet Russia as a country was deeply anti-Semitic in a harsh Judophobic context. There are Yiddish songs in tribute to Stalin, but as far as Russia goes, its history is tied to the Russian Orthodox Church. Unique from the other Eastern and Oriental Orthodox churches, the Russian Orthodox Church had strong Judophobic strands of ideological anti-Semitism within its apparatus. And then a paraphrase taken and based from Isaiah P. Kametstein. He wanted to say to Dr. Abraham Weisfeld, "It is correct that you, Dr. Abraham Weisfeld, are finally referring to yourself as a Jewish Palestinian." Now that all be said, everybody, I sign off now, and I sign off just reminding everybody that as being that I am a Sephardi, and what a Sephardi refers to is a Jewish Al-Andalusian, which really means there's no ethnic difference between myself and an expelled Muslim from Spain by Ferdinand and Isabella. We were expelled together. So a Sephardi just simply refers to a Jewish Al-Andalusian. Now ethnically there might be some differences in there because we didn't marry with Muslims as much as we married among ourselves or people converting, but more or less you'll see that there is, if you were to even bother with the stupid DNA tests, you would find that Muslim expulsion from Spain, DNA relation to Sephardi would be very, very strikingly similar, almost no difference. Maybe some variation here and there, but as I'm expressing, because since there's a celebration of culture that's being encouraged here, let me pronounce that I am a Sephardi. And as a Sephardi, what this means is that I am a Jewish Al-Andalusian. Just like Marvin Eliyahu is also a Sephardi, and he would also tell you the same thing, that means that he's a Jewish Al-Andalusian. So in the words of a Jewish Al-Andalusian, Palestina, libre, libre, ma'asalama, shalom.